Hi, I'm Andrea. Welcome to today's Harper Lecture. The Harper Lecture series highlights the University of Chicago's collective commitment to the highest aspirations and standards in research and education. Today, you will hear from our world-class faculty and enjoy stimulating conversations on critical topics, all in the comfort of your home.
We extend our appreciation in advance to our global university community for their collective efforts in supporting the mission of the university in today's deeply challenging environment. Technology has allowed us to remain connected and engaged, and tonight, you too will be part of the conversations. A couple of notes. All participants will be muted. However, we do encourage you to ask questions. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation. If you have issues with audio, you may want to shut down your programs running in the background or dial in from your phone.
Hi, I'm Colin. On behalf of everyone at the UChicago Alumni Office, we offer our deepest gratitude and appreciation for your continued support. We're proud to be part of this community as it has come together during these trying times to invest in our students, empower our faculty and scientists, and extend care and connection. And now it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 41st season of the University of Chicago's Harper Lecture Series. Thank you for being with us. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Harper Lecture, Halfway Home, Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration with Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller. I'm Andrea Hodgman, Associate Director of Intellectual Engagement and Travel and the Program Manager for the Harper Lecture Series. On behalf of everyone at the UChicago Alumni Office, thank you for joining us. Please allow me to introduce our moderator. Nicole Marwell is an Associate Professor in the University of Chicago Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. She is also a faculty affiliate of the Department of Sociology, a faculty fellow at the Center for Spatial Data Science, and a member of the Faculty Advisory Council of the Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation. Her research examines urban governments with a focus on the diverse intersections between nonprofit organizations, government bureaucracies, and politics. Professors Miller and Marwell, thank you so much for being here. Professor Marwell, I'll hand things over to you.
I'm just so pleased to be here alongside my colleague, Dr. Reuben Jonathan Miller, who's assistant professor at the University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. Dr. Miller came to the University of Chicago after a few years on the faculty at the University of Michigan, and we are so lucky that he decided to join us and to bring us his unique, deeply sophisticated insights into life at the intersection of race, poverty, crime control, and social welfare policy. His new book, Halfway Home, Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration, is based on 15 years of his research and practice with currently and formerly incarcerated men, women, their families, partners, and friends. Dr. Miller conducted fieldwork for this book in Chicago, Detroit, and New York City, enabling him to tell this compelling story about how law, policy, and the emergent practices of state and third-party supervision have changed the contours of citizenship, activism, community, and family life for poor Black Americans and the urban poor more broadly. It has been my great honor to learn from Dr. Miller as he wrote this book, and I look forward to sharing this time with him and with all the members of the audience tonight. Dr. Miller continues to examine critical questions about the effects of crime control on social life, with ongoing fieldwork conducted in global cities with different public policies, including Glasgow, London, and Belgrade. He's currently conducting research on the moral worlds of people we have deemed violent, and will launch a comparative study of punishment and social welfare policy in the port cities that were most involved in the transatlantic slave trade. For tonight's program, we're going to have two short readings from Dr. Miller from his book, with some conversation between us after each one of those readings. We will also leave time for questions from the audience after the second reading, so please be sure to enter your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So with that, Reuben, the virtual floor is yours.
Nicole, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Nicole is my colleague and friend, and it's been just wonderful to work alongside her. And it's also a great honor to be invited to give the Harper Lecture, and to be able to do it in this way. My book came out just a little while ago, and so what I'd like to do is, as Nicole mentioned, 2 readings. The first comes from chapter 3 of the book, a chapter called Sinner Man. And in this chapter, we're following someone. We meet a man named Jimmy. And so I'll just jump right in. So we begin in Detroit. It's 2014. And at this time, I was doing research at what's called the Detroit Reentry Center. It's on Detroit's Mound Road on the east side of Detroit. And what I do is I meet men on their way out of the reentry center on their first day, on the day that they were released. And so they'd be released for prison, they'd be released into this treatment program where they'd spend about 6 months. So I'd head to the muster room, the cell where people who were about to be released waited for the final buzzer and the final gray steel and plexiglass door to slide open. They didn't know that their loved one was on the other side of that door, eating overpriced concessions, waiting to pick them up. When the final door buzzed, the men inside would walk out to reunite with their loved ones. A father would hug his boy close. A grandmother would reach up from her seat to embrace her long since grown child, her walker in between them. There was always some exchange between the people released from their cages and the people who picked them up, even when they were in a hurry to leave. There'd be some intimate conversation or just a few words between each parent, maybe a nod or a glance or eyes that danced nervously from a lover to the floor, or maybe a parent would acknowledge how much a child had grown since the last transfer. All of it signaled their loved one was known and cared for, even if he made a mistake, even if she hadn't visited in some time. Some people made a beeline for the exit, their loved ones trailing close behind, but the relief on their face when the last door buzzed was almost always there. They had been in prison, but now they were on their way home. Taking in this scene, I almost missed Jimmy Caldwell, who walked out of that detention center alone. He showed up early and had a cup of coffee in the waiting area of the University of Michigan's Detroit Center in Midtown, where we would have our first interview. Everyone who met Jimmy commented on how nice he was. A stocky man, he appeared somehow vulnerable, hanging on your every word as if it mattered in some profound way. And while he looked at you directly, he never made eye contact. I invited him from the table where he was drinking coffee with lots of cream and sugar to the room where we have our first interview, and Jimmy moved quickly. We covered the basics quickly. He had a 10th grade education and had been arrested 20 times. High school was hard. He tried Job Corps, but it wasn't for him. He sold dope, used dope, went to prison for property crimes. After a 3-year sentence for grand larceny, he finished a 6-month drug treatment program. He was happy about that, and he used lots of treatment language. He talked about people, places, and things, and codependence, and enablers, and my madness, and my disease. I wondered about his life, but I needed to get beyond the things he learned to say in treatment groups, and beyond the stories you hear when you watch Black gangster movies from the 1990s, like the hard and tragic life of violence and addiction that poor Black kids are presumed to find themselves in every day. Black life in cities like Detroit has been so caricatured, and these caricatures have led to bad policy, welfare reform, the war on crime, a million mentorship programs that try to replace missing Black fathers. This is despite 2 decades of research that tell us Black fathers are there, that Black fathers help with homework and go to games and share moments of affection like all fathers. In fact, Black fathers spend more time, according to the research, with their children than fathers from any other racial group, even when they have multiple children, and even when those children have different mothers, what social scientists call family complexity. But the news about exceptional Black men who teach low-income kids complicated handshakes, and YouTube clips of white principals doing the latest dances with little Black girls and boys, and viral videos of police officers playing basketball with kids in dreadlocks, and the memes where 100 Black men show up for the first day of school with a prominently displayed caption like "real fathers" or "real Black men." This convinces us that this is abnormal. And it's not just bad policy. Lessons from 1,000 studies on missing Black men and 1,000 more on what sociologists call social disorganization show up in the first interview I do with almost everyone I sit down with. So do slogans that moralize Black life and all the things that preachers and pundits and presidents say at gatherings of Black men. All of this comes up within the first hour of the first interview. Social scientists might call this the social desirability bias, meaning people tell you the stories they think you want to hear. There are interview techniques to get past all of this, but it takes a while to move beyond the noise in people's heads, and it takes more than a few hours and a few cups of coffee to really learn about someone's life. I had a plan. I would ask Jimmy about his family, about what it was like for him to grow up on the east side of Detroit, and about the city and how it had changed since the last time he was locked up. I'd ask what it was like for him to come home. I'm the only boy, he said quickly, confidently. He had 4 sisters. When I asked where he was in the pecking order, he sat up in his chair laughing. "I'm the baby." "You're the baby?" I said, thinking I knew what he meant. When I told him, "I'm the baby too," we laughed together, loudly, 2 middle-aged men sitting in an office in Midtown, decades removed from our childhood, thinking about some pleasant thing from long ago. But Jimmy stopped laughing abruptly. I was surprised by how quiet he got and how quickly the mood changed. He wiped his eyes, sighed, leaned his head on his hand. "So," he took a long pause. Tears started to stream down his cheeks. "I was kind of spoiled. I got pretty much everything I wanted." 30 seconds of silence. Jimmy was full on crying now, no longer bothering to wipe his face. His dim brown eyes red and full, his voice soft and broken, he went on. "So when crack came, there was a lot of disappointment, I being the only boy." "Is that why you're upset?" I asked. What a dumb question. I didn't really know what to say. There was a grown man crying in my office. I handed him the box of tissues we kept for times like this and sat with him in silence. "It's not where I want to be right now," he whimpered after a while. "My sisters, they getting there. It's getting there, you know." I wanted to know more. He told me his sisters had helped raise him, but they were close growing up. He wanted to keep it that way, but that's not how it turned out. "Everybody kind of looked up to me," he explained, wiping the sides of his face again. "Like I said, it was a lot of disappointment. Time after time, they give me the benefit of the doubt. Basically, I shit on them." "What about your parents?" I asked, trying to find my bearings. "Well, my father, he was married, but he wasn't married to my mom. I got 4 sisters," Jimmy explained. They were his half-sisters, he said. That is, they were not all his father's biological children. His mother had children from a previous relationship, and his father had a family of his own. "He took care of 2 families," Jimmy said. "He treated all my sisters like they were his. He go home, but I see my daddy every day." "Were you close?" I asked. "Yeah, we were close," he said. Jimmy's father died when he was young. Cancer. It was 82 or 83, Jimmy said. He was just starting high school then, 14 years old in a new school with a mother raising 5 children on her own. Things started getting different. I don't know if it was because my mother didn't really know how to raise a boy. I was a baby, so if I want it, I'm gonna tell my daddy. I get it, he said. But after my father died, I stopped getting all the perks. Jimmy's father was an auto worker at a time when people still had pensions. His mother made Jimmy and his 4 sisters take their dead father's last name to ensure they would be taken care of financially, in Jimmy's words. But there were no more perks other than the few $100s that came in the mail each month from the Social Security office. And that went to Jimmy's mother. Jimmy's father, the man who Jimmy saw every day, the one who took care of his sisters as if they were his own, was dead. "I wanted to wear all the good shit I've been wearing," he said, "but it wasn't that kind of party. It felt like everyone is against me, so I started doing dumb shit." Jimmy would wait for the mailman to come each month. I figured, well, that's my check. I should be able to do what I want with that money. And I wouldn't think about bills or none of that, he told me, reflecting on his route into crime. This was the reasoning of a 14-year-old boy, one who didn't realize that the mailman was delivering his check, or that the place where his father developed cancer might have a responsibility toward his family. And it wasn't just his family. Cancer rates among Black auto workers rivaled the rates in the famed Cancer Alley, that 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River of petroleum refineries and chemical plants that claimed the lives of a generation of Black men. Auto workers were dying. Leukemia, colon and pancreatic cancers, lung cancers, cancer of the stomach, cancer of the liver, brain cancer, cancers of all kinds claimed the lives of so many Black people in Detroit. I started to steal, Jimmy said. Like me and the other guys in the neighborhood, when the mailman come, we take the mail, try to cash the check ourselves. A whole group of boys had lost their fathers to the auto plants. The same auto plants that convinced the government to use eminent domain to demolish 1,500 homes on the promise of good jobs in the 1980s. Those same plants provided just a fraction of those jobs. Then they packed up and left. Those same auto plants did not cut checks to the boys' families, but they went to the Capitol during the Great Recession with their caps in their hands, asking the government for a check, and they left with one. Jimmy and his friends stole the meager Social Security checks the state sent to their mothers, but that plan didn't work, Jimmy said. No one would cash the checks. So there the boys were, their names on checks their dead fathers had earned with no way to access the funds. That's when I left high school, he said. The rest of the story is predictable. Jimmy ran the streets, stole, started selling dope. By 16, he was using. By 17, he had been to jail. By 18, he was in prison. He lied to his family and lost jobs. He stole things from people's homes. He used more drugs and did time over and over again. 6 months for stealing car radios, 12 months for drug distribution, 18 months for grand larceny, dozens of arrests for trespassing, for using, for stealing scrap metal, for not reporting to his parole officer on time when he was high. Jimmy stayed with his sisters in between bids. And he loved his nieces and nephews, having no children of his own. The kids wrote Jimmy when he was locked up, sending pictures and visiting as often as they could, but over time, he became more difficult to support. Jimmy told me that worse than the guilt for stealing and using and lying, worse than all the consequences that came with all of that, was the separation he felt from his family. A lot of time with my addiction, I wouldn't come around. It's a lot of hurt. They were saying, don't leave. But after a while, they knew what to expect. Jimmy would disappear for months at a time, then call collect when he ran out of money, or knock on the door when he got out of jail. When he showed up again, the kids were older, and he was older too. Now he was middle-aged, and the kids were grown, all with lives of their own. Some were married, some had families, some started new jobs. One even signed a record deal. I don't know, he took a deep breath. I guess I'm happy on that part, thinking about their success. But it's hard. I look at myself and all the potential I had, how I let myself down. And I feel like, wow, I got left behind. I understood. Jimmy had spent 20 years cycling in and out of different kinds of cages, workforce preparation programs, mandated substance abuse treatment programs, prisons all across the state. One was a 5-hour drive from home. He was in halfway houses, jails, detention centers, almost everything in between. All this time, the baby was separated from his family. Jimmy was all alone, and he had felt that way since he was 14 years old. The problem of mass incarceration has never really been about crime. It's that the people who Americans are afraid of are subject to a separate set of rules. They live in a separate and altogether different social world because they belong to a different political economy, one that has no safety net, one that does not support the children of dead fathers, one that left them behind. No social service agency, no matter how well funded, can bridge the divide between these two worlds, nor can any of our current criminal justice policy reforms. We have not yet come to grips with our problems or imagined an adequate response because our assumptions about the extent and cause of crime have been wrong from the beginning. You cannot treat or arrest or perhaps even reform your way out of mass incarceration because mass incarceration is about citizenship, not criminal behavior. And citizenship is about belonging. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Reuben. That was a great reading. I want to begin with a question that really is inspired by that last paragraph that you just read. This idea that mass incarceration is not a problem of criminal behavior, but rather a problem of citizenship and belonging. As I understand that idea, what you mean is that in the United States, we as a society have decided to cast out the people who have transgressed our laws and to cast them out in so many different ways, in employment, in housing, in family relationships, and to cast them out for so long, sometimes even permanently. As you say elsewhere in the book, we make no space for them anymore in our society. So I'm curious, what would you say to someone who argues that that's a perfectly just punishment?
I mean, I would ask about what their theory of justice might be. I mean, maybe not in those words, but what do they think justice is? There are 45,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target people with criminal records, 45,000. There are 19,000 that exclude people with criminal records from accessing employment. Over 1,000 that exclude them from accessing housing. Thousands that don't allow them to participate in the civic realm in ways that they might find meaningful so that they can change the law and policies that hem them in. We've snatched their voice. And some might say, well, you do the crime, you do the time, this is justice. But this doesn't just begin when people break a law, it begins long before. There's a story in the book about a brother who I call Martin. I use pseudonyms throughout the book unless it's a public figure to protect their confidentiality, to protect them from scorn and abuse. And Martin was serially sexually abused as a child. Martin ran away from home after these years of serial sexual abuse. He became homeless. While he was homeless, one of the boys who he ran with a group of about 3 boys, and they would kind of sleep together at a paper factory. There's a whole sort of section of the book that covers this, as you know, Nicole. And one of his friends dies. And Martin gives over to despair, and he begins drinking. He's 13. He begins using drugs. Martin is homeless for another decade. During the decade that Martin is homeless, he's a child. The police don't check in on Martin. No social service agency responds to his needs. He's just a wandering child. But he's arrested 14 times for trespassing as he grows into his adulthood. Now, those are all misdemeanor arrests. Most guys in my study, I followed about 250 people across these cities, as you mentioned. Most guys began getting arrested at 14 years old, like Martin, who gets finally arrested at 16, but starts getting in trouble with the law very early on at 14. So for Martin, he's arrested 14 times for trespassing. When he's older, he's arrested for the last time, this is the time where I meet him, for drug distribution, for possession with the intent to sell. He has 3 crack rocks in his pocket. He's at this point addicted to crack. So he has 3 crack rocks in his pocket, and they say, you're gonna sell those. So they take him in for a felony. The prosecutor's pushing for a felony for distribution. The judge at the hearing says, this feels excessive. I was there. The prosecutor says, I know it feels excessive, Your Honor, but Martin has 14 arrests. He's a criminal. He's a repeat criminal. He's a repeat offender. The 14 arrests, 14 times for trespassing, is evidence of his criminality. Where were the police when Martin was raped on 3 separate occasions that he told me about? Where were the police when Martin's friends were murdered? They didn't come. In Detroit, the average response time when I was doing my research was 50 minutes. And that's if there was an active shooter from the time you called the police. In Chicago, while I was doing my research, the murder clearance rate has gotten better. But while I was doing my research, the murder clearance rate in Chicago was 17%. So where were the police when Martin needed them? For his abuse, for his murder. Where were the social service agencies? They were not there. But they came when Martin coped in the best way he knew how with the trauma that he lived through. Does Martin deserve a life sentence? These are the questions that I might ask. If we know something about people's lives and their experiences, we might think about these things very differently.
So what you're saying here, I think, really connects to the conversation that's happening now about the question of defund the police, right? What are the police for? How should the police be deployed? You're pointing to the ways in which neither the police nor social service agencies nor anybody else, helped Martin or helped Jimmy at the time that they needed it. Right. So how would you use what you learned in the work you did to write the book to think about this question of where do we go from here with policing?
I think that we have to address harm. Harm is a real thing. People cause harm, and you need someone to call. Whether you call that the police, whether that someone is someone who shows up with a gun. I'm not sure that someone needs to show up with a gun in every instance that we see people showing up with guns to address social problems. But I think that you do need someone to call to help in times of need. I think the response has to start further upstream than the police. I think the reason why this line at the end that we're spending time with, and it's more than the line, it's kind of the point of the book, that we're spending time with mass incarceration being about citizenship, because at the end of the day, because citizenship is about belonging, is because we have not yet imagined a world in which people who we're afraid of, people who've caused us harm, have a place. And so I think we start there. I think we start by making a place for people who've caused us harm. We have to see not Jimmy, but Martin, who I've talked about a hot second ago, not as some homeless drug addict, waiting to roam the streets marauding. We have to see Martin as a person in need, as a child from the very beginning in need of help. We have to respond to his trauma, the violence that he experienced as a child, from a place that understands that he is a child. And then we have to look at his behavior, his response to the things that he experiences. As such, we have to look at it in context. For Jimmy's stealing. He's stealing and he's robbing, and eventually he goes to prison for setting up a Home Depot, for setting up a Home Depot in the basement of an abandoned building. So what he does is, Detroit is being, is under a rehab boom, and there are all these DIY rehabbers operating in Detroit because you can buy a house at this time at a tax sale for $1,000, $2,000, $500. And so there are all these real estate developers, many of which used to be dope dealers, by the way. In fact, he lives with, in one of the buildings that his old dope dealer is rehabbing, turning into now a clean life, becoming a real estate developer. But anyway, so all this DIY work is happening, and his last crime is for theft of copper and appliances, and he sets up a quote Home Depot in the basement of one of these buildings. So Jimmy steals. Okay, so Jimmy and Martin are easy to understand because these are property crimes, these are victimless crimes, these are nonviolent offenses. The real question and the real test for society is how we respond to murderers, how we respond to people who commit sexual violence and harm. And what we've done so far is we've rolled out the police, And then we rolled out police by other means. So what we've done is we've conscripted grandmothers and girlfriends into the policing of these folks by changing law and policy in such a way that we exclude people from access to housing, access to employment, changing liability law in such a way that I can evict a grandmother if she lets her grandson sleep on the couch and he's got a criminal record, forcing her to put him out or put herself at great risk. And so we've drawn family members into the crime fighting machinery, making family members probation officers and police officers. Our response has been a hammer to the needs of people, because we haven't been able to imagine a place where they belong. We haven't thought about the inclusion of people who have harmed us. And what we've gotten are ebbs and flows in violence. What we've gotten are ebbs and flows in property crime. What we've gotten is deep legal exclusion with no notable effect on crime in any of the major cities in the country as we've enacted these tough on crime policies. And so what I'm suggesting we need to do is think about a different response other than police and policing and the framework that drives the idea of policing, which is a framework of punishment, to respond to the needs of these folks who are sort of showing up in our cities, in our neighborhoods, at our door. We need to have a different response to crime. And there are different responses to crime. Of course, there are restorative circles with all of this, but then we exacerbate their precarity, which we know leads to crime because of the 45,000 laws and policies that make it nearly impossible for a man like Jimmy to get a job or a house or something like that.
Yeah, so Reuben, I know that you speak so passionately about these issues, partly from your research and partly from your own experience. So I wonder if you could share with us the second reading that you planned for tonight.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to. The second reading comes from chapter 4, a chapter called Millions of Details. So I spent time talking to you about Jimmy, one of the brothers that I followed. And I told you that in total, I followed about 250. I followed sisters too, mothers, sons, daughters, lovers, friends, men and women who have been in cages. And we met one of the brothers. We met Jimmy earlier. But I want to tell you about a relationship that's more personal. I want to tell you about my relationship with my brother and how the prison changed our lives. You know, what happened was, while I was doing the research for this book, I started out this work as a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. It was an ethical impulse that brought me into this work. I was driven by a scripture. It was Matthew 25. When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? The first two before that was, when I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was hungry, did you feed me? And then when I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? That drove me there. But when I got there, a couple things happened. One is I met my father, who wasn't involved in my life, and he had been gone. He had been sent to prison for about 20 years. I don't know if that's the reason why he wasn't around. He just wasn't. But I know that when I did meet him eventually in my late 20s, that he had been to prison for many years. And I already started doing work as a chaplain. And then I even started graduate school. I went to graduate school to be a better chaplain, and started my research, and then took a faculty job. And while I took a faculty job, my brother was incarcerated. And so I decided to write that in because it was interesting to me, intellectually, personally, that I was writing about what it meant to support a loved one. And I was following people who had loved ones in jail and prison while I myself was supporting my own loved one. And I realized that this experience I was having gave me a different insight that other scholars either didn't learn, didn't care to share, or just refused to write about. So either they didn't have the same insights, or they decided not to share it. But either way, it led me to different sets, a different kind of understanding about the situation, different kinds of questions it led me to and allowed me to ask and answer. And so I want to share an excerpt from the chapter I call Millions of Details. It's about caring for my brother. Hello, this is a collect call from some voice that sounded like my brother's, a prisoner at the Michigan Department of Corrections. If you feel you're being victimized or extorted by this prisoner, call customer service at some number rattled off too quickly for me to catch. The digital woman gave more instructions. To accept this call, press 0. To refuse it, press 1. To prevent calls from this facility, press 6. Why was Jeremiah calling collect? I'd added money to his account, or at least that's what I thought. Shit, I hissed out loud, but not quite loud enough for my young son, Jonathan, to notice. I fumbled through papers and moved books to find my wallet under a coffee mug. In Michigan, people in prison make calls using prepaid accounts. Calls cost 21 cents per minute plus a $2.95 processing fee. I spent $80 a month on my brother's calls. Why was he calling collect? Did he forget his passcode? Had I paid JPay again instead of Connect Network, which handled inmate trust funds for your loved one to buy soap and ramen noodles? We still use JPay to send emails. They were the cheaper option. For 20 cents a page and 20 cents an image, you could send a 5-page letter. Add $1 for a holiday e-greeting card, and email could cost $3. Return stamps cost an additional 25 cents. Jeremiah sent updates and asked about my family. At the end, he would make requests. He'd ask me to look up job training programs or send screenshots from his Facebook page. He'd ask for books and magazine subscriptions. He'd always need money for something: gym shoes, a television set, an AM/FM radio, each item costing twice as much at the commissary as it did in the free world. I sent Jeremiah $250 for his Christmas inside, first Christmas, to buy boots and a television set. We didn't know that the MDOC takes half of everything over $50 in a 30-day period to cover legal debts. And Jeremiah, like every other prisoner, owed thousands of dollars. $600 for a checked out public defender who met with him just once for 20 minutes on the day of his plea deal. $1,600 for court costs. $400 for an extradition fee. $68 for the state minimum cost to record his felony record. The cash that remained from his Christmas gift left enough to buy boots or a TV, but not both. I was breathing hard now, my chest tightening. I couldn't remember if you pressed hashtag after your debit card number or waited to enter your security code. Shit, I thought. The digital lady was making me start over. What must it have been like for Jeremiah standing at the phone in his unit? Was there silence? Did he hear me entering digits? After spending too long in my head, the call connected. "What's up, Ruby Scuba? What you doing?" Jeremiah asked. We caught up quickly. He told me a funny story about the men he lived with and asked about my wife and kids. "Let me ask you this, though," he said, like he always did before making a request. I was always relieved to hear his voice, but I was always in the middle of something. That time I was writing. The previous time I was in a faculty meeting. The time before that I was on a date. No matter if I was sleeping or playing with my kids or trying to clear my mind, when the call came, I had to answer. Any boxer will tell you that the punch you don't see coming is the one that puts you down. The collect call you didn't expect, the court date you didn't have the gas money to attend, the conversations with your children about why your uncle was in prison, the $2.95 processing fee that overdraws your account, the $6 $34 overdraft fees, the unexpected embarrassment as you sit at your desk entering an order for 30 packages of ramen noodles, what it feels like when Michigan Packages runs out of the flavor of ramen noodles he wanted. It's these little things, the daily disruptions that manage to put you down. 1 million families live this way, sending money they can't afford, making court dates they don't have time for, driving 5 hours only to be turned away because the facility is on lockdown or because someone's dress isn't long enough. It's the way the guard talks to you when you visit, or how you're herded single file through dingy corridors to pay too much for microwave concessions. It's watching your loved ones demolish that food and how they're marched away when the visit ends. It's feeling alone, though everyone you know has experienced this. 1 in 2 Americans have lived some version of this story, because half of all US residents and a full 2/3 of all Black people have a loved one who's done time. However, it's not just the family members who are frustrated. It's especially hard for people in prison. The combination of bad cell phone reception and a busy life means your incarcerated loved one can't reach you. After 4 attempts, he wonders if your distance is intentional. He's gone weeks without mail and months without a visit. He's hearing another lecture from his younger sibling about what he should be doing with his life. He's trying to raise his children through collect calls 15 minutes at a time, and he knows what he's put you through, but he calls you because he needs you. Prison only exacerbates these needs. It escalates these tensions, changing the nature of even the most intimate relationships. But it's not just like this on the inside. The prison is like a ghost, haunting formerly incarcerated people as they look for work or a place to stay, or as they sit for dinners with the people they love most. Upon release, people with criminal records are greeted by 45,000 policies that dictate where they may go, with whom they may live and spend their time. 19,000 employment restrictions, 1,033 housing restrictions, 3,954 restrictions on civic participation, 1,600 that tell you which family member you can spend time with, legislating your domestic rights. But if all politics are local, the politics of mass incarceration are hyper local. Just pick a state. New York has 1,052, Michigan, 659, Illinois, 1,289 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions, including 512 that target employment, 177 that target political and civic regulations, 30 housing restrictions, 50 policies that regulate family life. This is the world that my brother would enter. And I knew that punishment follows you like a ghost. I knew that my brother, like the 19.6 million people estimated to have a felony record in this country, would have to live and move through a social world like this, an alternate legal reality. You have 1 minute remaining, the voice said. I jotted down Jeremiah's requests. I love you, bro, my brother said. I appreciate all you do. I love you too, man, I replied, before the digital woman disconnected the line. Stop there.
Thanks, Reuben. One of the really unique aspects of your book is the way that you do what you just read for us. You draw on your own personal experience with the afterlife of mass incarceration in relation to your brother. Now, it's an unusual choice for a social scientist to make, and you are a card-carrying sociologist, social science all the way.
I have the card.
It's an unusual choice to put yourself in your analysis this way. Now, a number of reviews that I've read about your book have referred to this aspect of your writing as memoir. But I think you might disagree with that characterization. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Nicole. In the appendix, I talk about this as a sociology of being together. I'm taking very seriously a prompt from a noted scholar and also an alumni of our school and one of your old classmates, Loic Vacan. And Loic pushes us to think about what he calls a sociology of flesh and blood. And the idea is to use your body as an instrument. He famously becomes a boxer in a woodlawn gym. And then he pushes us to use our bodies to understand the social situations that people are immersed in, to smell it, to feel it, to develop the bodily habit, the muscle memory required to deal with the onslaughts of life. I take this very seriously. And what I try to do is I try to write from my flesh, to be in my body as I'm moving in and through a social situation. And what I try to do is I try to draw from that to give me insight on what it is people are experiencing. And in addition to the insight it gives, I also try to write in such a way that has emotional resonance, because I believe that the reader needs to know how a social situation feels and smells. They need to experience it with you so that they can assess the veracity of your claim. Lastly, I included myself in the story. So on the one hand, there's methodological payoff from doing that. You know, we see things people don't typically see or choose to write about. And they're two sides of it. You know, perhaps they didn't see it, or perhaps they saw it and decided, I'm not writing about that. But the and then methodologically, there are things that I learned that I wouldn't learn, so the things I can come to know, the things I can relay, and then I can relay it in such a way that the reader feels it and can assess it. But the last part of this is really just a matter of fact. I mean, I was born poor and Black after 1972 in segregated Chicago. I couldn't avoid the prison if I wanted to. You know, I explained that this work started as an intellectual interest. I met my father after I started working as a chaplain at the Cook County Jail, not before. He wasn't the reason that pushed me in. I didn't experience his loss and absence. My grandmother raised me, and all my bristling about social disorganization theory and about family complexity and the sociology of the family writ large, all my subtle critiques of that literature, suggest, I was certainly, to you, of course, because you know me quite well, but I think to the broader world of social scientists, I'm communicating to them that I'm just fine with my grandmother raising me. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not that I missed something. She brought something different to bear. There's nothing wrong with family complexity, having different last names. It is what it is. There's nothing wrong with the Black family. Black family is as beautiful as every other family. And so I own that. But I'm born poor and Black after 1972. That still means something. And what it means is that I couldn't have avoided the prison if I tried. And so if I was honest, if I was honest, then I would have been in the model. My brothers were certainly in the model, right? I would have been in the model. Of course I was arrested like everybody else. Of course I've been pulled over by the police. I was born poor and Black after 1972 in what we might call the mass incarceration generation. This is the generation where 1/3 of all men of working age will find themselves in a cage at some point. 30% of those who graduate high school, over a third of those who drop out. It is a normative experience in the life course. It follows you like a ghost. So my brother gets arrested and incarcerated after I start doing research, not before. He's not the impetus for the work. He's evidence that the work is necessary, if that makes sense. I wrote it in part because it tells me new things. It allows me to see different things, but in part because I just really wanted to be honest. I just really wanted to be honest.
Thanks, Reuben. So it's 7:45 now, and so I want to turn to some questions from the audience. And again, if you have questions, thanks to those of you who have already put them in, and if you have questions, please feel free to add them. I want to start with a question from Randolph Barba. He says, there's a school of thought that you have to deal comprehensively with the psychological, educational, and social underlying issues in poor neighborhoods to solve this problem. The example is the project in Harlem, by which I think he means the Harlem Children's Zone, dealing with all issues in that specific neighborhood. Do you support this approach to solving these problems before they become critical and people end up in the incarceration system?
I mean, yes, absolutely. I support a holistic approach to meeting the needs of people who are vulnerable to the traps we've set for them. I mostly support a public policy that does no harm, mostly. So I mentioned that there are 45,000 laws, policies, and sanctions. What we've effectively done to people who we've arrested, and more so to people that we've convicted of a felony, because as your sort of route into the bowels of the prison system deepens, so too do the consequences you experience on the outside. What we've mostly done is we've used habitual offender laws to stack charges so that by the time you finally get in trouble, you really get in trouble. That's like a Jimmy. Huge problem. Like Martin, absolutely.
Sorry, Martin.
Jimmy, yes. Martin, all these folks have been arrested multiple times, and that those arrests, some of which were for nothing. I mean, so if you grew up in Chicago, on the low end, anywhere beneath, if you grew up anywhere north of the University of Chicago and south of 12th Street, really south of about 22nd Street, south of Cermak, then you know what it's like to be so close to the neighborhood Bridgeport. And police officers in the 80s and 90s used to pick kids up who were hanging out together, being kids, and they just drop them off in Bridgeport. They just drop them off. Bridgeport used to be incredibly racist, incredibly dangerous. I remember riding my bike over by Brother French gave me this bike from his church. I went to his Lutheran church, and I ride my bike and I get to close around White Sox Park, almost sort of teetering into like maybe close enough to the neighborhood, and kids would always throw rocks. Now I'm 44. I'm not that old. That's not that long ago. Not that, you know, I'm fairly, you know, I'm middle aged. I'm relatively young middle age, right? Like it's not that long ago. Police would drop these kids off. Police will pull over and arrest Black kids, poor Black kids especially, so often that they made a game out of it. Let's run. Give chase. Okay, there's that part. There's public policy, so habitual offender laws that allow prosecutors to stack, to add weight. So if you would have gotten 15 years, you're going to get 30. If you would have gotten 5 years, you're going to get 10. Like, so this sort of deepens the trouble you find yourself in. Then when you get out, you're greeted by 45,000 laws and policies that generate precarity. Well, all the criminological literature tells us that housing instability, zero access to treatment, unemployment, all these things lead to crime. So what we've done is we've enacted a public policy of rejection that produces precarity that we say is linked to crime. This is the world that we've made, right? So I think certainly a holistic approach to addressing the deep needs of community is necessary, and community needs those things in part because of the public policies that we've enacted, public policies that have harmed, that have made less stable already precarious communities. You know, that's what I think.
Thanks. So I've got a couple of questions here that I think kind of follow on that one and that are kind of looking different angles. So from Mary Sturm, we get a question, you know, where is the first and or best locus of reform? Is it education? Is it social services, mental health, policing, courts, reforming prisons, housing? You know, it's a little overwhelming to think about all the areas in which there are the kinds of lacks and the kinds of exclusion that you're talking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts about where you start, because otherwise it can be very overwhelming. And then I want to also bring in this question from Doris Provine asking, can having the right to vote meaningfully address how we do public policy and address this issue of belonging? Right? Should the right to vote be automatically restored upon release? Does the crime matter?
I think so I want to take the last one and move into the first one. But let me say with the first one, I say you get in where you fit in. You get in where your interest lies, you get in where you can, because what we've done is we've enacted a social policy of exclusion, and we've presumed guilt for some groups of people. Basically at birth, the social science literature tells us, I'll talk about Black people, but we could think about indigenous children. We could think about Latinx folks. We could think about all the people that suffer from these compounded forms of social inequality that produce disaster in their lives that they have to then respond to. But let's talk about Black people. You know, the social scientific literature tells us that Black children are viewed as 4 years older on average and more guilty than white children. The social science literature tells us that Black people are 5 times more likely or twice as likely to be arrested, 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, do more time for the same crimes when they're sentenced. So like dealing with racism and the way we view people becomes very important. So the get in where you fit in. So for example, I've been focusing on the law and policy mechanisms that produce precarity. One question that I might ask very practically, you know, are there 45,000 laws? Do we need 45,000 laws? You know, what do you need to feel safe? You know, and what's the position of the person that you're electing on that? And what about the people you're talking to? You know, you've got somebody's ear. This is an influential group that I'm privileged to have the opportunity to talk to, and certainly among the students, you know, these are going to be sort of world changers, world makers, in fact. And so, you know, whatever area you're in, the thread that runs through all of this. So the practical thing is the 45,000 laws we could push for expungement, you know, this kind of thing. The practical thing is through all of this runs a thread that otherizes, that distances oneself from the other. This is why we have to think about this at the level of citizenship, which is really all about belonging to a political community from my vantage. Citizenship is about belonging to a political community, which is just another way to say we belong to a human community where power circulates in particular kinds of ways. So to think about the ways that we can make social worlds where people belong. So where's the place? The place is wherever you feel you have influence, wherever you have the ear of someone who has influence. That's the place. The place where I'm trying to intervene now is of course in my teaching and research. It's in the public, where I'm trying to push us to think more carefully about making a world in which people who've harmed us belong. I think we have to start asking the really hard questions. What do we do with someone who's committed murder? What's an appropriate punishment? These are questions we don't even ask. We don't even say, what's an appropriate sentence? Not the general citizenry. In fact, the federal, like the criminal code at the federal level is revised every couple decades, maybe if we're fortunate. You know, and so these are things that are on the books that have a weight and a force of inertia that we have to that needs to be addressed. That's what I think. I tried to answer both questions. Did I answer both questions or just one? I feel like I may have just answered one.
Well, the second question was about returning the right to vote to someone who's been incarcerated.
Yes, absolutely. I think that absolutely matters. And we see that matters because of the regressive move that happened in the state of Florida, for example, when the right to vote was granted. So Amendment 4 grants the right to vote to 1.4 million formerly disenfranchised people. And then an appeals court makes a decision that it's okay that to follow the administration, the DeSantis administration, that says, well, you must first pay all your administrative fines and fees, which effectively disenfranchises half of that group. This is already a group that's less likely to vote than others because we know the relationship between precarity and social instability and civic participation. We know that groups that are less stable are less civically engaged, participate at the ballot box less often. So it's already a group that probably doesn't, where there are barriers to participation and the added barrier of an actual fine. What we've done is we've turned a proverbial debt to society into an actual bill in that state. So we can see the power of it by looking at the resistance to it. So I think the right to vote as an automatic right is something that matters. We can also think about civic participation in multiple ways, including, just to raise this as an example, in about 30 states, people with criminal records aren't allowed to sit in the jury pool, like to be a part of the jury pool, which means in about 30 states, and I believe it's more, people with, if you're arrested and you have a record, you'll never be judged by a jury of your peers. It will never happen. And so the kinds of traps, the eventual guilty verdict, the kind of crime that you're convicted of, the length of time you spend incarcerated, all of that stuff isn't administered based on someone with a criminal record having the opportunity to be judged by someone who actually understands the situation in any meaningful way, that has that kind of lived experience. And so we can think about civic participation in that way. Participating in the jury is a form of civic participation. But we can also think about the expectations that we have on people and what people deserve. It seems like the only mode of social mobility, or one of very few, is for people with criminal records to work in service, to become violence interrupters, credible messengers, to work with formerly incarcerated people. We don't allow them. I mean, I've mentioned that 19,000 labor market restrictions. There's over nearly 4,000 restrictions on civic participation. And so the only forms of civic participation we think are useful is service for this group. And so I think we have to rethink and reimagine what we mean by civic participation, reimagine what we mean by citizenship. We have to think about the ballot box for sure, And we also have to think beyond the ballot box. What are the many different ways that we are told that we belong in everyday life? That's the question for us. And let's ensure that those ways are available to all citizens in this democracy.
You know, the last bit of the question about participating in elections was, do we restore the right to vote to everyone? And I know that part of what happened in Florida was, even from the beginning, there were certain categories of conviction that left you out of having your voting rights restored. And it was specifically people convicted of murder and of sexual assault.
That's right.
And I know that this is an issue you've been thinking about for your new project. You know, can we as a society call ourselves truly an inclusive community if we always keep some people out? And if you have a minute here, because we don't have much time left, to say something about that.
I think the victim offender binary is artificial and highly problematic. So most people who are victims of crime, who are offenders, quote offenders, people who've committed crimes, including crimes of murder, have been victims of crimes. Everyone who's in my book, all the 250 people who I followed, some of whom were convicted of murder, some of whom were convicted of sex offenses, some of whom were convicted of property crimes. All of them were victims of crimes themselves, some starting very early on, some starting later in life. And so what we've done is we've drawn this binary between victim and offender. We've drawn another binary between violent and nonviolent offenders. Half the prison is in prison for a crime that we deem violent. And so the test for us as a society is not, I think, how we treat people who we like, who we feel sympathy toward in a given moment in time. Right now, this would be the quote non-nons, nonviolent, non-sexual, non-serious offenders. That's not the test of the society. The test of the society is how you respond to people who've committed things that we might find heinous. The test of the society, the test of our ethical impulse and our orientation toward justice is not whether or not we treat someone we care about well. It's how do we treat people who challenge our sympathy, who challenge our ability to empathize. Well, the question is not, do you have empathy or sympathy? The question is, what is your moral commitment and what kind of society do you want? So if you want the kind of society that creates a pariah class, we'll just continue. This is what we've done. We've made sex offenders. We've made class X felons, is the label in the state of Illinois. We've made these folks with these, quote, serious felony convictions, and we made it almost impossible for them to live after they've spent decades literally in prison. I followed one person in the book who was in prison for 27 years on a wrongful conviction, and another person in the book who was in prison for 40 years for a crime that he did. The question is, after you spent 40 years in a cage, how much more punishment do you need? What does a murder have to do with voting? What does a murder have to do with the ability to work? What does right? Like, so these are the questions that we have to ask, because a lot of our punishments are detached from the reality of what we're calling the crime. And a lot of the crimes that we've convicted people of, this is the I know we're done. This is the last most problematic part. I mean, among the most, a lot of the crimes that we've convicted people of, that we've decided you've actually done this. There have been nearly 3,000 exonerations since 1989. Those are people who've gathered the resources to prove that they didn't commit the crimes that we've locked them up and thrown them away for. We live in an imperfect system. This should cause us to rethink how we punish, what punishment is, whether punishment is called for the things that we're punishing people for. And the most important question is, when should punishment end?
Reuben, thank you so much. This has been a really terrific conversation. I really thank you for this work. I'm going to pass it back to Andrea because I know we're past time.
Thank you, Professor Miller, for sharing your very compelling work with us. And thank you, Professor Marwell, for being here to extend the conversation. You can purchase a copy of Professor Miller's book at the Seminary Co-op at the link in the chat. It's also available for purchase with online book dealers nationwide. If you'd like to hear more from Professor Miller, you can listen to the UChicago Big Brains podcast, episode 65, Why Life After Incarceration is Just Another Prison. Visit bigbrains.uchicago.edu. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.